Chi, welcome. Good evening, everybody that are here tonight with us and also online. I would like to welcome you to this Islanders at the Helm event. My name is Daniella Britt. I work for the Islanders at the Helm research project, and my job is science communication, so organizing events just like this where we talk about the research that we do and bring it to the public. Islanders at the Helm is a 5-year project funded by the Dutch Research Council, the NWO. Bonochi, welcome. And we have 11 researchers in total, some more because some of them stay with us for a limited period of time. They're PhDs and postdocs in their field, in 5 fields. Francio will be talking a bit more in detail about the project later on. We are partnered with the TU Delft, with the University of St. Martin, and we work on all the 6 islands in the Caribbean to do research about social adaptation to climate change. More on that later. Tonight we're at the University of Aruba. Just a year ago, Dr. Charissa Granger, also a postdoc researcher in our project, talked about how music and sound can be situated in discussions of climate change and its effects. And tonight we are continuing the conversation on climate change and how it relates to culture, heritage, and society. This event today and in Aruba, this afternoon, we were also at the Instituto Pedagógico de Aruba, at the IPA, with the students. Buongiorno, buonanotte, with the students there, kicking off this session for what we call the Transatlantic Academic Program, which is the part of the research project where we give lectures and presentations on the islands to different publics. So this afternoon, we were at the IPA with Gregory Richardson as well, who is also part of our project, who unfortunately can't be here tonight. He also works on music and how climate challenges and the experience of climate is discussed in, for example, carnival music. And tonight and today we start in Aruba. And as we go on next week, we will also be presenting in Curacao and St. Martin. So all the islands get a chance, some of them this time, others at a different time. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers for the evening. We have Dr. Francio Guadeloupe and Harold Kelly. I'm starting with Dr. Francio Guadeloupe, who, despite his appearances, has had a very, very long career. And this is an abbreviated version of everything that he has done. So since obtaining his PhD in 2006 at the University of Amsterdam, he has worked in various universities of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. He is a social and cultural anthropologist by training, specializing in public anthropology. He served as the president of the University of St. Martin for 4 years, where he held a chair in education and nation building until Hurricane Irma led to the temporary closure of the institution on the binational Caribbean island of St. Martin and Saint Martin. Under his leadership at the UCM, they obtained international accreditation for its associate degree programs in hospitality and business. He has also, through cooperation with the University of the U.S. Virgin Islands, offered internationally accredited adjoint and bachelor and master degrees in educational sciences and business administration. After the hurricane, Dr. Guadeloupe returned to the Netherlands. He is currently employed as a senior research fellow at the Royal Netherlands Institute for Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, who also hosts the Islanders at the Helm program. And he is also an associate professor at the University of Amsterdam, where he has been tenured since 2013. Harold Kelly will also be presenting his research as a PhD project within the Islanders at the Helm project. Harold Kelly graduated at Leiden University with his master's in 2003. Since then, he has been working as an archaeologist at the National Archaeological Museum in Aruba and has also served as its deputy director between 2007 and 2013. In the Islanders at the Helm context, Harold is looking at long-term evidence for social adaptation to habitations and climate challenges in Aruba, Bonaire, and St. Martin from an archaeological perspective. The islands will serve as case studies to examine how islanders coped with challenges that negatively impacted their water and food resources and influenced their settlement location and housing structures. Coping mechanisms identified within the archaeological record will contribute to the development of innovative sustainable solutions within the Islanders of the Helm project to mitigate climatic challenges faced today. These are our speakers for tonight. I would like to invite Francio to kick us off. Thank you so much.
Good evening. And good evening to those who are tuning in online as well. So good evening to you too. I would first like to thank you for being here and for granting me your attention, because I don't take that lightly. I think it's important to say thank you when someone at least attends to what you have to say. I will say a few words on the matter of culture and climate, its articulation or its non-articulation. How do you think these two things together? So indeed, I don't have to give any introductions. Those already passed. How does this work here? There we go. I don't have to say a lot about this. So I write in both English and Dutch, and I write both about the European part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the Caribbean part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And prior to that, I worked in Brazil. So there's one book that's not on this on Brazil, and the book Dançam te Leven is about Brazil. And before working on Brazil, I worked in India. So I actually trained as an Indianist. Then I moved to Brazil, and from Brazil, I moved to the Caribbean. So you would call me a generalist as far as anthropology is concerned. Let's continue. I was thinking about what to speak about in relation to climate and culture. And as I was thinking about that, a particular tune kept coming into my imagination. And it was actually the song of Tina Turner. And that song is What's Love Got to Do with It? I think some of you might know that song. Who doesn't know that song? Everyone knows Tina Turner's song, What's Love Got to Do with It? It's an interesting song because while she's saying it's not about love, she's not neglecting love. She's saying a particular understanding of love is what's wrong, but you can't give up on love. So she's pushing another understanding of love. So too, in understanding that she was forcing me, or that song was forcing me to think, and I think you only think when you're breaking out of common sense. If you think culture and climate, you will easily jump to what is called Aruban culture. But if you're thinking, you're just thinking culture. And that song came in. So I would say it is about culture, but it's not about a simple understanding of culture. It's about a complex understanding of culture. That's the articulation you make between culture and the climate. Next slide. Guess we have to do it this way. So in thinking about this, I was speaking to some persons and they said, what you see in the hospitality sector is not really Aruban culture. They said, if you want to understand Aruban culture, you go to what is called the Kunukus. You go to the rural hinterland. There you find something like an authentic Aruban culture. Next slide. So they mentioned cultural expressions like the Ragai, which you know of John the Baptist and so forth. And they said, next to that kind of culture, we also have newer culture that came in with the newcomers. The carnival that you just had a couple of days ago, yesterday was the last one, right? The day before yesterday. That is also Aruban culture. So they placed what is called authentic and newer culture. Next slide. Now, when I heard them speak, I thought here is actually an echo of an older discussion. You hear this across the globe, the traditional versus the new. And I think this depends upon certain ideas that you find in Caribbean thought. I think it's important to study Caribbean studies because Caribbean thinkers have been thinking about these things. When they hear that, they don't say, oh, makes sense. They say, what exactly are you saying when you say this is authentic and that's new? They say it depends on three ways of looking at the world. Way number one, this is Edouard Glissant, by the way. Edouard Glissant said you have a totalité monde. It's a way of looking at the world in totalities, in nation states, in countries. When you do that, your conception of culture will be the conception of culture of the UNESCO. It will be, this is the authentic culture of this place. That's the authentic culture of that other place. It might move, but you can locate it. So each place has a culture in a totalité monde, in a perspective of the world as a totality. The second perspective is the perspective of the écomonde. That perspective says when you see something culturally, it might be an echo of someplace else. So then Aruban Carnival is an echo with a difference of the carnival that emerged in Trinidad and so forth. When you look at your online information about the island, you find this story of the echo monde. So you can connect things and you can say it's an echo of something else. The third one is the chaos monde. He said that perspective is not a perspective that ties culture to nations or nation states. The chaos monde says everything is open and culture is constantly coming in. No one is mediating it. So you can't claim this is the culture of a place. You can't use the notion of authentic or non-authentic because the authentic is changing by everything that's coming in. So it's becoming new. And the new is also being influenced and it's becoming authentic. It's just constantly shifting. That's the chaos monde. Understanding the world from the perspective of chaos. And chaos is order, but it's complex order. It's not a simplified order. Next one. So, next one. So again, another Caribbean thinker at Duke University, which is Micheline Critchlow, she said, perhaps the best way to understand the Caribbean, if you take it as a chaos monde, then you would say the Caribbean is an entangled portal rather than a bounded site. What does that mean? An entangled portal means something where everything is constantly coming in and leaving. You can't close it off. You can't say, this is Aruban and this is not Aruban. This is Trinidadian and this is not Trinidadian. You need to recognize that it's moving. It's constantly changing. That's the perspective, she argues, that actually would do justice to the Caribbean and the Caribbean islands as they exist today. The totalité monde has value and purchase, but it has purchase in the world of, let's say, UNESCO and cultural heritage and these types of things. It might not have value if you want to do an intervention with youngsters and you need to understand the culture of the youngsters. That is not per se the Deragai, that's something else. And that is as authentic for them as the Deragai. And maybe the Deragai, they would say, yeah, well, but that's not really us. So you need to choose which perspective you're using. What that means is that instead of saying authentic and new, traditional and new, you could say that there are perhaps four, as ideal types, four kinds of things that you can identify in Aruba. One is that you can say Aruba and many Arubans have a kind of cosmopolitan culture. That means they presuppose certain values that are becoming universalizable. For instance, the values of rights for LGBT, for instance, the values of human rights and so forth. You have youngsters who deeply believe this. This is their culture on Aruba. Next to that, you have a conservative move. People who will say, almost like we want our country, but they mean we want our culture back. They too will argue based upon, let's say, what they call traditional values. And of course, you probably know this preacher or pastor, he's basing himself on the Bible, but he calls it traditional. So you have the traditional, you have the cosmopolitan, you have the cosmopolitan, and you have those who say culture must be able to connect to development, the culture and development. Culture must be a commodity. We must be able to make it monetary. It's a third group of persons. And they read culture in this way, and they say, well, it's nice if it looks this way, but we have to adapt it to the times or adapt it to the tourist industry or what have you. Good evening. Let me just wait until you sit. It's fine. And then, wait, back. There you have the fourth one. The fourth one is those people who say, we are recording culture to salvage it for the past because it's changing. I think you have 4 positions here in Aruba. You probably have more, but at least 4 we've been able to identify. People that are very cosmopolitan in their outlook, people that are very conservative, people that say, let's remember capitalism, and people that say, yeah, we're safeguarding for posterity. Let me wait until you sit. Yeah. No, that's fine. It works. So you see that's further removed from the notion of authentic or traditional and new. This doesn't need those 2 positions. Does work? Okay. There's a 5th one. Visually, it looks this way. And sometimes it looks this way. It's a national culture. And it's a national culture based upon what anthropologists call a cultural grammar of encompassment. What they mean by that is that in its presentation, like in India's presentation of its culture, it will say, we consist of many different people. We consist of many different cultures. So it encompasses everything. That's how Aruba presents itself in one happy island. But the twist of a culture of encompassment is to say, but one specific one embodies all. You see the double move? We're everything, but one embodies all. In India, when I worked there, they said, Jesus is Hindu too. Jesus is encompassed, but Jesus is a Hindu. All right, yeah. Wait until they sit. No, it's okay, yeah. So you have these 5 different models of culture that we see on the island. The national one, the cosmopolitan one, the conservative one, the one tied to capital, and the one tied to cultural heritage politics. At least 5 of those, and there might be more. Now, if we go back, and you see a manga cartoon, if we go back to Glissant and we try to say, what would happen if we take the Chaos-Monde seriously, which is creolization seriously? And we say Tina Turner's What Love Got to Do with It is Aruban culture. It's American culture and Aruban culture. It's both. It doesn't have to be authentic, non-authentic, because it's coming in if you understand, again, an island as a portal, an open portal rather than a bounded site. Creolization, according to Glissant, he says you don't talk about creolization by saying some people are creolized and others are not. Some are mixed and others are not. Everyone is mixed. If you understand the world from the Chaos-Monde, everything is constantly changing because everyone has all these influences in them. So therefore, he says creolization as an idea means the negation of creolization as a category. You don't have the category of the creolized anymore once you have the idea, the understanding that everything and everyone you meet is a mixture of different things constantly changing. That's the position in Caribbean studies right now. The creolization position, which is not the Creole culture position. We are a mix. That's the culture of encompassment. The creolization culture would say, for instance, I had the pleasure of meeting Aruban youngsters who spoke Korean. And I thought, how did you learn to speak Korean? Because they're watching Korean movies. So they learned to speak Korean. That is important for them. That's part of their cultural arsenal. That's part of their cosmopolitanism. I will not say that's not authentic. It's authentic for them. Does it mean that all Arubans are learning to speak Korean? No, but it means that some in this portal are learning this. Others are doing other things. So you can have all these 5. That's why I say you can have a complex understanding of culture and climate. Creolization is not about roots. Creolization is about the rhizome, as it's called. If you take a potato or you take a, what are these things called again? What are they called in English again? Ginger, correct. You take ginger. Ginger doesn't start with one root. Roots can emerge in different places. It can make different kinds of moves. If you can understand Caribbean societies this way, you understand it doesn't have one core. Aruba doesn't have one core. Aruba has many things springing up. They don't have to connect. They're constantly moving and creating other stuff. That might be an understanding of Aruban culture, which is different than the understanding of the totalité monde, which is different than the understanding of the eco monde. To accept creolization, you will have to time me. I need to stop. To accept creolization, I go back to Critchlow and I go to Antonello Gerbi. He said, when you look at Creole, oh, let me go back here. When you look at Creole, I'm not supposed to move. When you look at creolization, he says creolization never started with being an ethnicity. That's something new. That's a Eurocentric gloss upon creolization. What it signified in the beginning was not a distinction that was ethnic or economic or social, but geographical. Chickens born in the Americas were Creole chickens. People born in the Americas were Creole peoples. People from, let's say, Latin America that moved to the Caribbean islands, they were Creole people. All it meant in the beginning was something born out of its place. That's what it meant. And Antonello Gerbi said, people in creolized societies across the globe, as long as they keep going back to an ancestor, they are making a mistake. They are new. They can never only be connected to one ancestor because they have many other ancestors happening. If you ask me, I would say, I like roti. So I have an African connection, but what I eat is primarily Indian food. I live in the Netherlands. All of that is me. This is Antonello Gerbi's notion. So he says when you see people going back, it's because they have not yet accepted their creolization. They're still speaking in unitary identities. They don't understand themselves. Micheline Critchlow, or Micheline Critchlow, she says we would have to undo ourselves of a set of domineering models to really take culture seriously. What are these domineering models? One model is to presuppose that culture equals geography or equals geographical location. If people are enjoying South Korean movies, it is in the Caribbean. But if you think culture as only tied to geography or geographical location, you can't see this. You dismiss it. Secondly, she says another domineering model is to think culture only in relation to the colonial legacy. Here, it would only mean the Netherlands and the island. Then you can't see anything else. Whilst this is an island with a lot of American influences. But when you think culture only through the colonial legacy, you miss a lot. The third, which she talks about, is the question of tying culture simply to national identity or local identity. Culture can't be tied to that if you take culture seriously, if culture matters. Because it's localizing, but it's localizing from different things, and it's changing again. I had some songs to play, but I won't. I think that in official channels, the totalité monde is the one that rules. And I think perhaps on Aruba, that's the case too. When people think culture and speak culture, they're speaking cultural heritage. They're not speaking a critical, dynamic understanding of culture. I think we can talk about that in the break. So I need you to breathe. How much more minutes do I have?
You're okay.
Yeah, okay. So that's part one, culture. We're here still? Yep. Okay. Part two, the question of the climate. We know the Earth is burning up. If we follow the IPCC reports, prior to the IPCC reports in, 1972, there was the report of the Club of Rome. When I was studying, we had to read the Club of Rome. Before that, there was a report of the UN called Man and His Biosphere. All these reports in the 70s were speaking about the notion of climate change. They were saying we are messing up nature. We need to do something about that. And nowadays, since the 70s and the 90s, you got the decade for the people of indigenous rights. Now you have the decade of the people of African rights. But when you had the decade of the indigenous rights, suddenly people discovered indigeneity. And nowadays people say to tackle climate change, culture and indigenous culture. So indigeneity begins to matter. Whether it's the Khoisan in South Africa, the Tupi Indians in Brazil, you name it, it's always about indigeneity and indigenous ways of living. But I'd like you to look at some facts and figures why this is impossible. First, if we live 300,000 years, that's when we've existed. It took up until the 1900s for us to arrive at 1 billion persons. In 2000, we were 6 billion. So we moved very quickly from 1 to 6 billion. Now, we're in 23 years, we're in 8 billion, and we're climbing. In 1986, there were 1 billion consumers. Studying people would say 80 to 90% of those consumers lived in the North Atlantic societies. Nowadays, it's 4 billion. And of those 4 billion, 70% reside in the global South. China is a major consumer. India is a major consumer. Nigeria is a major consumer. South Africa, the NICs, the newly industrialized societies, Japan, these are massive consumers. You can't say consumption is only North Atlantic anymore. It's global. CO2 emissions since World War II went up 17-fold, and a fold is 100%. So which means 1,700% the emissions of CO2 went up. Water use, 9-fold. And you can continue recognizing how much we are busy polluting. We're the #1 geomorphological agent. What that means is that we move more sand around than all the rivers put together. We as a species. 96% of all the animals in existence are the ones we keep. Cows, chickens, pigs, these are the major ones. And then all the companion species, the rats, the cockroaches, those alone. And only 3 to 4% are what you see in World Wildlife Fund. Only 3%. And now that 3%, let's say 70,000, 43% are decreasing whilst we're supposed to be protecting them. So we have a major, massive animal extinction at our hands. 35% of all the wetlands, or half of the wetlands and the mangroves, and there's a wonderful project at this university that's trying to busy replanting mangroves, but this is happening at a large scale, and we will be urban species. What that means is that it might be night out there, but we control light nowadays. So we're further removed from cycles of life. If you take all of this, you recognize that we can never go back to some kind of indigenous life. The indigenous people are 3 to 5% of the global population. That's an impossibility, but that's what's so awful. But I think you're supposed to be thinking, and we are thinking in Islanders at the Helm, what is being said? You can't go back. Many of the bigger countries like China and India, they're saying, we need to develop. And then there's concrete. 8% of all the emissions are from concrete. And concrete is rising. The moment Nigeria and South Africa and these places start to develop, people want concrete houses. So it will keep rising. People want more. Middle class eats meat, generally speaking. So people start to eat more meat. We start to cultivate more land, and so forth. This is the cycle we're in. And the 1% emitters that emit more than many others. So whilst Sustainable Development Goals, and prior to that it was called Millennium Development Goals, was pushed, one of the Australian authors that we read a lot, he says, in a finite world, because the world is finite, we will have to accept that sustainability cannot go together with infinite growth. Because we have a mantra that says, grow, 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 grow. We know that I'm not going to grow more. My feet are not going to grow more. But the ideology is grow, grow, grow. You can't be sustainable and grow together. These two things don't go together. But it's sold as they can go together. I guess here. Oops. So for us, in this project, and then I'm coming to the end, in this project, it is about the critical zone. Whether we're studying a particular island or not, it's about the critical zone. The critical zone is the air, the water, the soil, and let's say 32 kilometers underneath. That's where life emerges. So we're studying life. We're not studying nature. Nature is the Lion King, the cycle of life where everything moves. That is not how life functions. Anyone who experienced a hurricane, I experienced a hurricane. I know that there's no such thing as harmony and balance in nature. I know that life is fickle, but everything is connected. That's why the image to my left is life. Nature is a separation between humans and the rest of life. And then we can use it as a thing. Therefore, in Islanders at the Helm, we don't say nature anymore. We say we're studying life. That's what we're studying. All the expressions of life. And humans are but one expression of life. And in our expression of life, we contain mineral, we contain all the other kinds of life. And everything contains everything in it. You would call it in Buddhism non-duality. There is no nature and culture. When I studied in anthropology, when I was studying, people said there is no nature opposite to culture. The only thing that's opposite to culture is death. That was in anthropology. We're trying to run away from death, so we're clothing ourselves, we're feeding and so forth. And sometimes we're inflicting death upon others as part of culture. And some of the things that we inflict death on is the rest of life. So it's life you're studying. Some inspirations, and then we'll end. Karen Nigg, a very interesting philosopher. She said the appropriate object of study is life. Why? And therefore you don't make a distinction between natural sciences, social sciences, and so forth. Because you can study self-conscious life, which is us, we're self-conscious life. But self-conscious life emerges and depends upon organic life. The seeds, the soil, which is not just sand, it's a complex of different organisms. That's also life. And those two together are part of logical life. Why? Because life always contains judgment in it. The smallest of bacteria or animal always judges, is this good for me or not? We, as self-conscious life, do the same. We do it qualitatively different, but we're doing the same thing. That's why, according to Karen, it's life you're studying. There is no nature in life, it's life in its three different variations: organic, logical, or self-conscious. Again, to the Caribbean, Glissant, he said, what you're supposed to be studying is the entour, again, Martinican. That means everything, the entire environment. When you're studying climate change, you're studying the poems that people have produced. You're studying human and non-human animals. You're studying the vegetation. You're studying what's in the rock. That's why Harold is going to be speaking about that. And you're studying what we used to call nature and culture. You're studying the everything, as he called it, the entour. Islanders at the helm. My last slide. So it's a navigational metaphor. For if you stop thinking in authentic or non-authentic people, you recognize that what we live on is on a ship. People came in to this ship you call Aruba, or the ship you call Curacao. And when we were doing the tour to try to organize this project, this program, there was a member of the Council of State, the Raad van State, Maria Plans, who said, call it Islanders at the helm, so that you recognize that people who are on the island should have actually a leading role in this project, and recognize that everyone came from somewhere, and some are leaving and some are coming back. So we called it Islanders at the helm, recognizing that the land is a sanctuary, a sacrament. So we study various expressions of life. We study the enabling life. So there are persons who are studying architecture and water management. So you have people walking about in buildings trying to see how it's built. What materials do people use? Can people get out or in? We're studying the water management. How do people use water? The energy cycles. Food. What are the food ways? How do people feed themselves? What do they consider pleasing and not? We're studying the extramodern life. The extramodern life is archaeology, paleoecology, paleoethnobotany. Paleoecology because there was a vegetation here 3,000 years ago that's not this vegetation. And it might be that when this island gets hotter and hotter, people complaining about the heat, maybe it might work to introduce those species that existed here 3,000 years ago, because this is a completely new environment. You might think you have this called nature and the built environment, but everything here is new. Because remember, this island, like the other islands, they were, in Dutch you call it onbost. And most of their animal life went extinct. So the paleoecologist is studying what was here pre-contact. How did that work? And can some of this be used? The archaeologist is studying the first comers. You're not the indigenous, the people who first came, the first comers, and the many different first comers that came. The creolizing life, which is about anthropology and the arts, and Gregory Richardson couldn't be here, that's why I'm giving this talk. The arts. Art is a way that a society reflects upon itself, what's happening. If you want to understand the unconscious of a society, you study its arts, its paintings, its music, its dance. That says something about how people are coping. And then we have the governance of life, which is urban planning, political science. What policies are there on this island and the other islands? Are these policies sufficient to deal with the climatological challenges that you have? And all of this is part of a transatlantic academic platform, which Daniella spoke about already. So this is the group. People of various islands with people from the Netherlands. Some people are not on this. Aga Kus, who has of Polish descent, someone of Palestinian descent, someone from Tanzania, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a mix of different types of researchers. Two examples at Waterface, which we'll be doing with the Transatlantic Academic Platform in April or May, if I'm not mistaken, on Bonaire, whereby it's not only academic learning, but we're also bringing in positions where children learn about climate challenges. And we're doing this together with Stinapa on Bonaire. In June, we'll have these three researchers who won all kinds of awards. They will be in Aruba and they will give workshops free of charge. And these are all professors either at York University or Bucknell University. They will just give these workshops free of charge to anyone who wants the workshops to try to think the Caribbean differently, to think Caribbean development differently. I spoke a lot. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Francio, for that awesome presentation. So I'm going to talk a bit about the research I've been doing for the last 3 years. As I said, as Francio, Danny mentioned before, I've been working as an archaeologist at the National Archaeological Museum for 20 years. And Francio also mentioned in his presentations perspective and change in perspectives. This research brought forth a change in perspective, how I also see the past. Before I saw it as remnants of activities, where people did specific activities that had to do with their livelihoods. Now I see it how people lived on the island. So that change in perspective also contributed to how I approach this research and where I want to take it and what I'm going to show and share with you guys tonight. So we've been talking about climate challenges and climate change for a while, and everybody is aware of it. But the thing is that it's something that has been going on for a long time. So as you can see, 10,000 years ago already, the region experienced climate change, and there were several hazards that impacted the region. So the 10,000 years mark is what we refer to Holocene. So during this time, the region experienced dry periods, wet periods, sea level rise, hurricanes, and also tsunamis on the ABC Islands also. Probably something that people didn't know. Aside from this, also you have in the northern islands, you have volcanoes and earthquakes, which also affected life on the island. So from the first time that people moved from the mainland of South America and they entered the region, they had to deal with these challenges that they had to overcome. That was also the case for Aruba around 3,000 years when the first people arrived on Aruba. So from the first time that people, you could say, set foot in the region, but also in Aruba, climate challenges was part of their daily life, and they had to find ways to overcome these challenges. So I'm going to give a bit of background of the two groups that live in Aruba. So the first one we call archaic age people because we don't know what they refer themselves to. And they arrived around 3,000 years ago. If you see in the area of Spaans Lagoon, you see there is a concentration of sites there, and there's where they arrived during different periods of times. This area was a very interesting area because it provided an access to the inland, to the hinterland, and which also provided access to marine resources. So the people that came to the island for the first time, they were able to go inside to you could say in the inner parts of the island while still having access to resources. And as you can see, this site, Roy Bringamosa, there's two of them, and then you also have Canachito. Those are the only inland sites during the archaic period. But these are the places where the people first set foot, not only set foot on the island, but when they decided to go and explore how the island functioned. I talked to Rolly Bislip, everybody knows him, and I asked him about, because he swam from Venezuela to Aruba and is very uses the sea a lot, and he told me that he kayaked in 4 hours from Aruba to Venezuela. It doesn't matter what the conditions are, so that makes you realize, like, okay, so you can do it in 4 hours. Then I asked him, how would you do this without any technology, without any GPS? And he said, I don't know. So I share this so to bring forth a change in perspective, because a lot of times I hear, oh, people in the past were primitive. It's not like that. They had access to a different type of knowledge that today we don't have because our way of life doesn't depend on it anymore. Okay. Then we have the ceramic period. These are the Caquetillo Indians, Arawak-speaking Indians that came from Paragoná region and Falcón. And they settled on Aruba, in Tanquiflip, Santa Cruz, and Savaneta, where they settled. They had their large villages, but they also had activity sites throughout the whole island, because the whole island, they depended on the whole island to obtain the resources that they needed. And these specific places where they settled were places which provided the best conditions for their settlement, and which also led to a growth in amount of people that could live in those areas. So my research objective is to identify adaptation strategies mitigating the effects of climatic challenges within the archaeological record, and to examine how islanders cope with challenges that negatively impacted their water and food resources and influenced their settlement location and house structures. So one thing that I've experienced during these 3 roller coaster years is that you have to be very flexible. You have to be what we refer to resilient. You have to be able to adapt yourself. So that's why there is a difference in the title that Danny provided and to what I'm doing now, because through time, I realized that the options that I had didn't really, wouldn't be able to provide me with the information that was required. So now I focus my research mostly on Aruba. There is also a component which I'm going to focus on Seba, but maybe that's going to follow. It depends on how far I get. So my primary research question is, which adaptive measures did insular inhabitants take to deal with climatic challenges experienced in the long term? And the long term is a very important thing because the long term is what determines if there is continuation on the island from the first time that people arrived throughout the contact period. And as we saw in the first slide, people arrived in different migrations, or waves of migration. A very interesting aspect about these different waves of migration or different times of arrival on Aruba is that they coincide with dry periods within the region. So in other words, when there were dry periods, periods of stress in the region is when we see the similar time frames that people are arriving on the island. And that was also the case in the ceramic period. So that means that we have to see this island from a different perspective, because nowadays it's the driest island in the region, and you wouldn't think that people from the mainland would come to Aruba during dry periods to look to live, or to at least explore the possibility for life. So this change of perspective is something that it's going to it will keep on coming up, because it's something that is necessary for also for us nowadays. So my research is based on human ecodynamics. I'm not going to read all this, but it's just to give a perspective. So it actually, human ecodynamics considers human as part of the natural system. That's what Francio referred to. So we are part of the natural system where our activities influence the functioning of the natural system, which in turn influences our function. And the longer we are interacting with this, what we call social natural relations, is what comes out to how this type of relation is done for in long term, you know? So the way that we act affects the natural system, and that affects us again. So it's a two-way street. It's not linear. You know, that's what Francio also mentioned, that we separated nature from human, and that's not the way it is. So archaeology makes it possible to look at all these aspects, because we look at the past, how people lived in their totality. So how they interacted with the resources, how they were affected by all kinds of challenges, and how they overcome these, and how life was shaped by these aspects. So this is how I approach my research. This graph took me a week to make. I'm very proud of it, so I tell everybody that they know about it. Yeah, it took me a long time, a lot. I have a notebook full of this graphs. So I approach this research from the perspective of a natural system, which is an interlinked system that consists of several different parts that work together. And on top, we have the physical geography. So we have the geology, the topography, and soils. So that influences how the land is shaped, where we get soils, which soils in which areas are suitable for agriculture or planting. Then we have the hydrology that influences the water availability and where it's located, and also the groundwater cycle. Then we have the biome, which is the land and marine animals, food resources, and plant foods, which are influenced by climate through rain, temperature, and wind. And all these together are what together they produce the natural resources that the island has to offer to sustain life, but which are also influenced by climatic variations in the form of hazards such as hurricane, drought, flooding, and sea level rise. So here we see there is a lot of components together at work, at play, that together produce natural resources to which they can sustain life, not only human life, but also animal life on the island. I was amazed that I talked to ecologist, and he explained to me that there are animals that live underneath rocks, because there's where it's the freshest, and it also produces humidity. So all life on this island, which is a natural system in itself, but which is also linked and influenced in the natural system of the region and the world, are depend on the conditions that are possible for life. So these all these conditions, they influence where people settle. As I said, people settle in the past in the areas with the best resources. They influence the water availability, which also again influence settlement. And then it influences diet, because where you find the best soils, the best water is where people are going to settle, because it's closer to the resources. And it also influences the demography, because the natural system can only support an X amount of people. And in times that it doesn't function well, or it's unbalanced, or as Francio said, it's not balanced, but we differ here, then it contributes to mobility. So in terms of great stress that the natural system is not able to, let's say, provide for everybody, people move to the mainland, and you have their familiar ties in the past, so people would go back and forth. Nowadays, we live on the island, and the sea is kind of a barrier, but back in the days, the sea was the highway through where people would communicate. I read this very interesting explanation in a historical document where somebody that came, this was, I think, in the early 20th centuries, somebody came from Europe to Aruba, and he wanted to go to Venezuela. And the person told him that he had to go to Curacao to ask permission to go to Venezuela. So just imagine that he went to Curacao, went to somewhere, asked the person, hey, can I take this person? Yeah, go ahead. Sailed back to Aruba and sailed to Venezuela. For us, that's crazy. That's the perspective, that's the way life went. You know? So again, the sea is a connecting highway in the past, and now it's kind of a barrier. So then we have also the aspect of shelter. Aruba is not impacted by hurricanes as the rest of the region, but we still have hurricanes in the past. And I'm also looking at that aspect. And if, for example, natural features such as caves or specific areas in the island might have served as shelter during hazards such as hurricanes. And then we have the part of the cosmovision. So for the people to be able to function within the natural system, it's very important to have local knowledge of how it functions. Where are the resources located? Which type of the year they are available? How are their availability impacted by challenges or changes in hazards and all those aspects? And through time, the more you spend time within the system, the longer the social natural relations with the system is, the better you know, and that knowledge gets transferred through generation. And people have, let's say, a bigger source of knowledge to tap into to be able to overcome challenges. But there are cases where this knowledge is not sufficient, and then in the past, the people would, through their cosmovision, would look for answers, which are expressed in the pictographs that we have on the island. I don't know which pictographs are directly related or are saying, okay, this is an adaptation for a specific hazard, but it's something that was part of it, because it was a source where they could get information from a different dimension. Because for them, we only consider this reality, but they also consider a different reality, which is expressed as the underworld, to which they would go and get information. So knowledge was not only accumulated knowledge through generation, but it was also obtained knowledge through wisdom, natural wisdom, you could call it. So my research is based in different aspects. I have archaeological research where I do surveys. So I go into the different landscapes and I look at activities or remnants of activities that were there. But I also look at how these areas or how these areas could provide or sustain life. Then I also have the component of field work, which is a very small part of my job. I always get asked if I'm like Indiana Jones, you know, but that's not the case. It's a very small portion of what we do. Then we also have material analysis. Oh, I forgot. Oh no, this is an old site. So aside from that, I also go through all the previous archaeological research that's been done on the island, but from this type of human ecodynamics perspective. Because before me and my colleague Raimundo, he's been working here for 25 years. I've been working here for 20 years. Archaeology has been going on since 1824, when the people went to Fontaine Cave on donkeys. They stayed over to just document the pictographs. You know, and through time, there's a lot of scientists from the Netherlands, from the University of, no, from the Netherlands, from New York, that came and did research and published. Adversteeg is one that did a lot of work here. So all his work, I will be looking at it from this perspective, not from settlements or remains, but from the perspective of functioning within a natural system with specific characteristics. Another part is the ethnographic research. So through my friends Frank Kelly and Zoe Velvet Ramos, I find out more about plant foods that are edible, because again, we don't know how many types of plant foods that are available, and research done by Dr. Pagan Jimenez on tooth enamel analysis, aside from identifying specific plant types, there was also 8 different plant types that he could not identify. So there is more plant food available on the island that we know of. And people like Frank and Zoe, they put a lot of effort to try to find what type of plant foods are available. I think a lot of, or several of people here, especially the ones from a more older age, have been consuming plant foods that we don't know now about. You know? So it's something that gets lost, but these people dedicated on it. Aside from that, we also have discussions with our regional partners through workshops, but also through interactions where we have discussions with Kalinago people, for example, from Dominica and St. Vincent, Guajira, and Suriname, to obtain more of a different perspective of how they experience the climatic challenges, but also how they struggle with them. Because as Francio said, we cannot think that they have the solution for this, because they also are undergo the similar effects that we undergo, and it's not always that they have solutions to it. You know, for example, one person told me that his granddad told him during the start of the year how the climate would be for throughout the whole year. So when he told me that, I was thinking, because he told me he could see it in the clouds. But I wasn't able to understand what he said until I came across this paper or this research, which they identify a specific type of cloud forming, which is called the ITZ, Intertropical Conversion Zone, which is where the air flows from the world meet in the Caribbean region. And depending on their characteristics, if they're in the north of the south in the Caribbean, that promotes a specific type of either a condition, either drought or a wet period. So these people were able to just look around and understand what was going on and what would happen. But he also shared to me that he's not able to identify these things anymore because the system has changed. You know, so while the system has changed throughout time, nowadays this change has occurred in much rapid fashion. Another aspect is community engagement. So what I'm doing here, giving out information to the public, but a very important part of the community engagement is also to try to understand and especially to gauge what the public understands behind science and what does it mean. Because I realized that us, our scientists, academic people, they always think that people understand what they're saying and that it's relevant to them. Nobody is really interested in what we have to say if it's not relevant. You know, so if I come here, I give you like 20 graphs, people will be like, yeah, it doesn't matter. You know, so that's a very important thing. So that's why I ask people, what do you understand under science? What do you understand of climate change? And also, in which ways do you experience climate change? And how do you adapt to it? And the interesting thing is that when I ask that, usually people say like, yeah, we don't know. But when I ask a bit further, they tell me, for example, oh, we get impacted by heat, it stops our functioning, or, you know, and we don't, for example, cook, we buy food, or we do this, or we do that. So people are constantly adapting to the conditions without realizing that they're doing that. And that's also the case in the past. The people just had to deal with the circumstances. Nobody was like, oh, this is the adaptation. I'm going to do this. You have to just live. So aside from that, I also do literature research is also part of it, scientific publication, historical documents, ethnohistoric publications, and archives. So through all these sources, I'm looking at how people approach or how they documented or how they talked or how they mentioned specific aspects that affected life or influenced life on the island. And how did that impact life on the island? So these are the key takeaways so far from what I've done with my research. So in the pre-contact period, so as we can see, as I said before, settling depended on the availability of resources, such as water, soil, and proximity to food resources. The water availability depended on natural circumstances, but also on technology to be able to store water through dams and canals. We call them royen. And very interesting aspect of this is that, so the Caquetillo that came here in Tanquiflip, where they identified that they excavated, they connected two roys to each other. But after doing research into that, it turned out that they were not only, let's say, canal builders, but they also built dams, they also built walkways. So it seems to me that what is mentioned in the historical documents, that they had that job to maintain the tankies, is because they're the ones that developed that technology, and they're the ones that understood where the water would flow together and how it would be able to best be able to store. So their effect on the you could say on the landscape is much more expansive than we thought. Okay. So also the diet depended on available marine and land food resources and in the introduction of crops. So an interesting aspect about all these crops are, and the corn is sorghum, maíz rabo, and all these crops are very suitable for dry environments, salt spray, and let's say not so suitable soils. But as Pagan Jimenez reminded me, that people that came and tested these soils only have a reference to suitable soils from Europe. Doesn't mean that the soils that they said weren't suitable were not suitable, because this, for example, the corn is planted everywhere, in Ayo, in North, everywhere, because it was suitable for it. So everything that was done was happened totally based on the suitability of it. People weren't thinking like, oh, I want to plant strawberries. They might have thought it, but it wouldn't work, and people would die from that. So it's the same with population density and spread, and also the mobility part of it, as I mentioned before. So not only did they use specific areas of the island, but they also moved from the island in times of stress, but also people came from the island. And this is another interesting information that we got from Jason Laffoon, that he did strontium analysis of bones. So what does that mean is that where you are born and where you consume foods from the soil gives a specific, you could say, ID from that area. So through analyzing that, he found out that there was somebody at Canachito, so at the burial site, that came from Venezuela but ate less corn than people from Marmac. So that again brings a different perspective, that you have someone here coming from the mainland that had a different diet to Aruba, and again, you have here people that ate more corn. So that means that the corn was more suitable or grew better here than where they came from. It can mean other things also, but it's just something that provides a different perspective. Again, because when people came from Europe, they said useless islands, it wasn't so useless. So again, aside from the transgenerational local knowledge, inhabitants obtain crucial insights from other sources, such as the spiritual realm, through their cosmovision expressed in the pictographs. And this is a very important aspect, because for the people of the past, this natural system was not just a resource extraction thing. It was also a living thing. And the life, as Francio mentioned, is expressed in minerals, plant, animal, and us. We are the most, could say, the advanced or most elaborate expression of life, But they saw it as something that is living. So when you have that type of relation to something like that, you give it value, and you try to your best to go about with it in a way that it doesn't destabilize itself, because the more the natural system destabilizes, the impact is directly related to your well-being. Post-contact is a different story. People came here with a profit-driven approach. They established life ways with no knowledge and consideration of compatibility with the natural system. Extractive approach of resources, which included all facets of the natural system, even the local population. So they didn't come here with the intention to, let's say, to sustain themselves. They came here to extract, because for them it wasn't, again, it was referred to as isla inútil. So it's just a source that they can do whatever they want with it, because it didn't have no value to them. So there wasn't value given to it, you know? So this caused displacement of local inhabitants, and also great loss of transgenerational knowledge related to the functioning of the natural system. But I must say that after people settled, after a while, there was integration with the people that lived here, and people started to understand the natural system. I mean, the majority of people that are from Aruba, that have generations living on the island, they sustain themselves through the knowledge of the local natural system, you know, and there's still people today living like that. So while a lot was lost, people understood through time, but in a different way, how to deal with the natural system and how to sustain themselves through it. So what does that say? Once when I came to my first slide, I was very happy, and I told Francio, oh, this is what I see. And then he goes to me, yeah, but what does that mean? You know, I was like, oh, I have more thinking to do. So how does this translate to our current situation? As he said, Francio mentioned, we can't go back to the past. Indigenous lifeways cannot save us, especially that we're living on a small island with 120,000 people and a couple of million tourists coming each year to the island. Our life is not dependent on the natural system and knowledge of the natural system and functioning of the natural system. The natural system is a commodity that helps us sustain our life, help us make a living, create wealth, whatever, you know. It's there for that. So it serves the purpose to make our life better in whatever extension or expansion that's possible. Because of this, we don't have, or we lost that connection with the natural system and the need to understand it, you know, and especially nowadays where our life is mostly focused on generating income, livable income. That's everybody, that's what is on their mind. So that is something that we have to live with. Nothing, you can do nothing about it, but it becomes a problem when you only focus on that, because that makes it difficult for you to consider everything that's within it, you know, because once you put your focus on one thing, it's difficult for you to see what's around it. And it's also difficult to consider what the results of your actions are. What we are experiencing today is the result of actions that have been taken hundreds of years ago. You know, when the people came, they extracted, they destabilized the natural system. It's functioning like that. The natural system will keep on functioning, but it will function in a different way. And adaptation to that will not only depend on technological solutions, because we always want to find solution from somewhere else. How the technology is going to do it. No, it depends on how our own natural system is able to overcome these things, because the natural system just functions. As a surfer, I know this firsthand, because every time I go surfing, depending on the condition, I have to adapt to it. If I surf a wave this big, it's different than the size of this wall or twice of it. The bigger it gets, the more serious it gets, the more you have to depend on your own system to survive the circumstances that you put yourself into. And even in cases when you have local knowledge, you have all that, you have your health, whatever you train, you're still at the mercy of the conditions. It happened to me a couple of times, almost drowned twice, I broke my ankle, all those things. You know, so those things made me realize that the only difference that between overcoming challenges and not overcoming challenges is your ability to hold on as long as needed. And if your natural system, if your system is not functioning properly, that won't last long. you know, and in the going back to the climatic challenges, the one thing that is going to affect, also what Francio mentioned, is going to be heat. And heat is going to destabilize a lot of people because of the impact on it. I mean, depending on your condition, you will be able to either bear it or not. So that's something that's very important. That's something that I see this whole story is about. It's about how do we deal with our own system within this natural system, because all our actions will influence us. And we don't realize it because we don't need to know about the natural system, but we're still part of it. Every time you breathe, you are part of it, you know? And even though you don't function without it or you function outside it, you are still affected by it. And the way to bring a change or difference in this is a difference in perspective, you know, and that is, I think, what will make it possible for people to consider their own actions more. Because again, we are part of something that no matter what you do, you cannot extract yourself from it. Well, when you die, you do, but that's not the idea, you know? So I want to leave you guys with this, to reflect upon it and maybe bring something different. So what do you consider part of yourself? Is it only your family? Is it your neighborhood? Is it your possessions? Does it extend to the beaches, to the places that you use? How do you see where you live in? Is it like a plastic cup that you just use, throw it away? Or do you have value to it? How far does that value reach? Does it all even include the Hubada? I mean, I hated that tree, but then I realized that, oh no, wait a minute, it's making place, it's fixing up the soil. Then I realized like, oh, it's a good tree. Nobody likes Ubada, but it's doing the job. I mean, it's such a good, it's doing such a great job that we have it everywhere because it's needed. You know, so just to reflect on this, you don't have to answer, but just to give you something. Masha, thank you. That was it. Very good.
Thank you so much. We're gonna have a Q&A session in just a few minutes. I'm gonna give you a bit of time to let it all sink in. Francio and Harold, can I invite you to come up here? And
I'll give you the jacket now.
we will also check for a second if we have any questions from our participants who are with us online.
Thank you for your attention.
Yes.
It's long.
Yes.
Maybe first, Francio, I can ask you to, if you have any thoughts on Harold's reflection as well, because you spoke about indigeneity and how this is really not something that we can go back to. It's an impossibility. And Harold spoke a lot about why that is. And you've been on, I know you're not on Aruba a lot, but you've been here now for 2.5 weeks. But this is a real discourse that we see and we hear very, very often. Go back to, we need to plant, we need to go back to having regenbakken, and all kinds of different things. It's also more of an international discourse. Any thoughts?
I would like to give these thoughts, but before, I think people have been listening so long, so maybe they want to add something, and then we take 3 questions and we then, but I'm gonna answer it.
Yes, okay, great.
I'm gonna
Then it
at
is
least-
one.
at least,
Does
try.
anybody have a
Yeah.
question or remark to share?
Yeah, regarding the long-term use part, can't we call it exactly as you had it on the slide? You mainly reflect on that. What was it, long-term adaptation for the
Yeah, long-term social natural relations. Adaptations,
long-term
social natural relations.
from the pre-contact people?
From the pre-contact to now going back. So I'm doing research which is multi-directional. I'm not only looking at one aspect. I'm looking at the pre-contact people, how they lived here, what happened after the contact period, and what was, let's say, lost, and what is still available now, and how that can contribute to understand a bit more how extensive this interaction with natural systems is. But what
Because you made a point there, and for some reason it made me conscious that back then their life expectancy was shorter than ours.
yeah, we
And
live
the
55
rate
minutes.
of history is different than ours.
Yeah.
We have now proofs of this.
Yeah,
So, talking about long-term adaptation
adaptation.
must be different then, because you are studying something for the long-term benefits of
Yeah.
us. But
So-
back then, that wasn't the case, so how do you look at that?
So here's the interesting thing about that. Now we are the most technological advanced, most wealthy part in history.
That part I understand.
Yeah,
But think on it, it's different.
and so it doesn't matter. Okay, so the age of death in the past is not so much relevant because it's how they lived and how they had to live. That's why I said we don't.
They didn't write. And they didn't leave written records for their fellow people
That's why
to
we do.
learn from.
Exactly, but we find it, and that's why archaeology is so good because it's a multidisciplinary research approach where we have all kinds of, we could say, data sets that we obtain from different types of research. So we have paleo environmental studies, paleoethnobotany, paleo something else more. So we have different of sources of information that we gather from trip, aside from what we do through excavations. Also, we have, that makes it very suitable for this type of research because we actually are trying to understand, as archaeologists, how people live online through a long time. So you have, so people lived here for 3,000, 3,000 years. I could say 2,500 years. We've been only living here for 500 years. So our understanding of the natural system of Aruba is after it had been totally transformed and destabilized. But before that, there was also a long-term understanding of how it functioned. And also, we see that, for example, in diet, because the two groups, archaic and ceramic had ceramics, so they had a different type of food preparation because they had pots. But they're the same type of diet remained throughout both periods because that's what functioned within the conditions that were available. That's why I mentioned the strawberry joke.
Yeah, but
I think I understand what you're saying. Let me try and answer the first, and then I'll go, because I think I get what you're saying. Look, on your question, I think people globally have lost a sense of futurity. They don't have a sense of the future anymore. When you don't have a sense of the future, that things can get better, then you hark back to the past. And then you are busy with your identity. I used to make a joke and I would say, you dream about being yourself when you have nothing better to do. So people that are future oriented are not busy with that. But when we lost a sense of the future, a sense of purpose, I mean, this is the first generation that will, generally speaking, not have it as good as their grandparents had. Most. So in all societies where that sense of purpose is gone and the sense of the sacred is gone, the sacred is what cannot be bought. In most societies, everything can be bought. On Aruba, it seems like a whole lot can be bought. In societies like that, people hark back. And then questions of autochthony, indigeneity come up. What they forget is that autochthony is an impossible universe because what makes us human is our incest taboo. That means that you always have to have an outsider to make children with. That's why it's never a closed system. There's always people coming in. Sometimes it's brides coming in from elsewhere, but it's always an external. What I hear you saying, and I think that's a point, is that phenomenologically speaking, these people lived shorter lives.
Yeah.
So they were not And one of the things when we cope with the question of climate challenges is that it's connected to the age of emancipation and modernization. The age of emancipation is the 19th century, when you had female emancipation and female suffrage, when you have the emancipation of slavery, when you have the emancipation from child labor. 1863 of slavery, 1874 in the Netherlands is when child labor is abolished. This is happening around the same time. That's the age of emancipation. That age was connected to the rise of antibiotics and so on. People live longer because we created all these types of stuff. Now we have modernization, which happened, let's say, in the 30s, 40s. This island took off during the Lago and so forth. That was modernization. That was this island. Given all of these things, so people had a sense of future now. It's going to get better. In the neoliberal, many people don't have that sense anymore. That's why we can't go back to them, because they never experienced neoliberalism. They never experienced modernization. They never experienced the emancipation era. If there were people who didn't live in accordance to, let's say, the ecological provenance was there, they died. We don't know how many actually didn't live correctly according to the to how they were supposed to live. We have to presuppose, given that they're humans like us, that many didn't actually live according to what they needed, because therefore you can find famines and so forth. They were like us in that level, but they were not like us because they didn't experience all the things we experienced.
Yeah.
That's why we can't go back.
And also, that's why the age though is not relevant. Because the age doesn't, so the length of life, it doesn't necessarily mean better life than people that live shorter amount of years.
But they were living for a long-term adaptation.
No, they just live. We call it adaptation. They just live.
You were trying to do that.
I have to have a title, so I have to say something. I need
to build long-term adaptation. So them,
Yeah,
they
yes.
themselves were doing.
We see it as a long-term adaptation. They just see it as life. But again,
It's just a selection of the best feature that have happened.
it's what we see in the archaeological record, what happened on the island. You know? But so nowadays we are the most technologically advanced. We live the longest. We have all these possibilities. You know, we're even going towards transhumanism, becoming robots and all that. But the question is our quality of life better? Is our natural and visual natural system better? Is it going to be able to hold on as long as needed? So there's the difference.
Thank you. Francio, you have a question online?
Okay, and there were two questions in.
Yes, and then
Okay,
I'll come
we'll
back
take
to the
all-
questions in the
Okay,
room
all
as well.
three, yeah.
From our colleague, Sharissa, she asks, Francio, can you speak to the dangers of authenticity narratives, traditional knowledge in relation to climate research? If we continue on this path, what are the pitfalls theoretically and practically?
Good one, but let's take the other questions too. It's a
Okay.
good one, but I'll take the other two. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question is much simpler.
Uh-huh.
So, my name is Robert-Jan Molens, and I'd like to say thank you very much to both of the speakers. Very nice presentations this evening. I'd like to ask Dr. Guadeloupe a question in regard to the first part of the presentation, which was on culture.
Mhm.
So the first section, right?
Mhm.
And by the way, I'm not a social scientist by training, so I'm not an expert in this field. But I'm just very curious on the research on the Aruban culture, where different segments were identified of the society, right?
Mhm.
And I just wanted to ask if you could speak to the concept of cultural identity. So let's say shared values or common values. Were any commonalities found within all of the groups? And specifically, things like the Aruban sense of autonomy, that's very deeply rooted. Was that recognized, or is that sort of eroding?
Good one. That's a second question and your third question. And I'll remember that. I'll remember them. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one.
In regards to the social cultural organization back in the day, there today, and related to why people have short lives, or they manage to have like the figure of the elders. My father, by the way, is a descendant. So by the oral tradition, how it went back then in the Wahira, how it was, is where I take it from. They have elder people who actually managed to live to that old age, who had a bunch of knowledge, took these leadership roles, and they managed to organize themselves into a social structures on which their main goal was to survive within that environment that they have to live with. Now, taking that to today, with our democratic system and our 4-year political system, I think that might have been contribute. It might contribute to how we see this economic growth-based economy, rather than in relating ourselves with our environment. For example, the way we are managing our waste here is a perfect example. The way we are polluting the groundwaters here is another one. And the way we are handling our nature resources like reefs and stuff. I'm a free diver myself, and I go every weekend to it. And I have seen changes in sea life and migration patterns of this sea life within the past 10 years, going every weekend to water. So how do you, because I didn't see that part of that social, cultural, or that political, economical box in your schedule, Harold. Or maybe you can tell me if you have taken that into consideration when you want to translate that from then now.
Yeah, so here's the thing, that's why I mentioned the question.
You start. No, no, start. Okay. Yeah.
So that's why the second part of what I presented had all to do about how we see ourselves, you know, and how we recognize ourselves, and are we able to see similarities in the natural system. Also, are we able to give value? And I think there is where the gap, and there's where the problem lies, because if the island is a plastic cup, use it once, maybe twice, you throw it away, because it doesn't have value. But if it's a reusable bottle or something that you got as present, you give it value, and your actions are based on that value that you give. I think there is where the problem lies with political parts, because we haven't received that, say, education or that idea when we grew up. It was not all our education is geared towards income generation. Doesn't matter what you do it to generate income. That part of what we are connected to, or what do we see as part of it? That's why I finished with that question. Then when you give something value, you go about it in a different way. Maybe you won't do the best, won't have the best decisions, but your decisions will be rooted from a source of, or from a starting point of having value and being able to recognize value. Something, it could be whatever, which is on the island. So I think there's where the problem lies with political part. So that's why I didn't really focus on that part, you know. And what you said is very interesting, and I really appreciate your comment and for sharing that also, because what you experience, your ancestors and the Guajiro people, they were able to give value to their resources, and they live in a very arid environment. It's very difficult to survive in, but because they understood the importance of valuing what they have, they try to go about it as best as possible. That didn't mean that they didn't take to bad things or they destabilize or whatever. But every action that they did or that they do has serious consequences. Because I don't know if you know Robertina Gutierrez, she's also Guajiro, and she explained to me that in Guajiro, people, several of her family members died while digging for water. So it's serious consequence to your actions when you live in such a way, because you give value because it sustains your life. Nowadays we don't. That's why I mentioned the plastic cup, and also I mentioned that The island is a resource for our gratification, enjoyment, wealth generation, whatever. We only use it for that. We're not able to value it. I mean, I've seen people go and walk in Calashito and they write the names on rocks. So even though they go in there, they don't give that place value and are not able to let's say, appreciate what they're experiencing. They just think like, oh, I'm gonna write my name, I was here, you know. They carve it in a rock. So that's just something that happens. And it's not something that you can force people, it's something that can happen through a change of perspective. Because that's something that I experienced myself. During the early parts of the research, when I was trying to, you know, after thinking like, oh, what did I get myself into this? Why did I do this? How am I going to do this, approach this? I had conversations with several people. And there was this one specific conversation that brought forth a change in perspective, which really made me see it in a different way. And this was a conversation that was about a specific area in Aruba, in south of the island, in the area of Rincon, Manzanilla. We locally refer to it as Costa. And we were talking about that area, and I could just see bare rock, just rock. There's nothing there, no trees, just rock. And, you know, you could see the sea, so you could think, okay, I could get fish or whatever, you know, marine food from there. But for me, it was like, you know, desert place, there's nothing. And then I got this perspective of abundance, good times, family ties, of nice memories, life, expression of life. And that made me realize that the same thing, if you look at it differently, can give you a total different understanding and also appreciation. It contributes to value. So a very long explanation. Yeah, okay.
There were two questions there, right? One question, let me start with your question and I go to the question online. And I don't know if I have to say anything about that because that was a question on the political economy of those times. When it comes to the question of autonomy of what connects, let's say, the various groups of persons who adhere to a particular cultural idea because they want to move that forward. Let's say if you're struggling for, let's say, the rights of a particular kind of minority, because you believe that is a universalizing culture that's emerging and you think that's important that it actually lands here on Aruba, then when someone says, let's say, so this is more cosmopolitan and this would be the more conservative, when someone of the conservative says, but this is our culture and our autonomy, this group will say, well, that autonomy needs to give way so that this can actually happen. So I don't think it's a full connection anywhere. I think they have different projects. So the cultures are involved with different projects. One culture is involved with a project of conserving and perhaps actually also stomping out things that they don't consider very, what they would consider Aruban. Another one is saying we need to renew this thing because the world is changing. Then you have others that are saying, all wonderful, but how does it connect to the Benjamins? You have others that are saying we have to guard it for posterity, for those that are coming and so forth. And you have the national, and I think the national one is where the question of autonomy is raised because it is presented as the slight of the nation. The honor of the nation is being taunted. Then it said they're troubling autonomy. But I don't think people are always into the national culture. I think the national culture only generally exists most of the time in books or moments. When I was here for the Dia de Betico, at that time, there's a lot of people who say, okay. Do they say that 2 weeks later? Probably not. Then they're busy with something else. And so there are moments, I think, that these things emerge. I don't think there is a unifying culture which connects everyone here on the island. Like, I don't think that exists anywhere. I think culture is always a fight amongst various positions. It's always there in that fighting element. I think what the notion of tradition does, that's the sleight of hand. It says there's a unity, there's a homogeneity there. and therefore it excludes many others. That's where I think the danger of only focusing on something called traditional knowledge is dangerous and sometimes unhelpful. I'll give you an example. I was on St. Martin when the hurricane happened, and people needed to heal. The National Institute of the Arts, run by Arlene, Ali, and Clara Reyes, one of the things that worked best was to give people courses, young children courses in meditation. Because meditation worked then. And they said, this is important. I know there are many things that people say is traditional, but what works now for many St. Martins? Because they were accustomed of having, let's say, a large contingent of newcomers, sometimes old comers from India, 2 or 3 generations. We have someone who's going to be talking on St. Martin, Ridi Samtani, whose great-grandfather came to St. Martin. That's 3 generations, St. Martin. Yoga is part of St. Martin culture. But when you think traditional culture, you will say, yoga's India. But she's saying, I'm 3 generations St. Martin. Of course, this is part of the culture. So you will use that. That's why I think tradition, oftentimes, if it's not understood as a fighting term with many different, it becomes homogeneity, and I think that's dangerous. Now, the last thing, which was the question of political economy, I think Harold's position is that ethics must come first. That's his position. Not everyone agrees that ethics must come first. Some people will say, no, politics comes first. The human is a political animal. But some people will say, no, ethics comes first. And it depends on where you actually stake your position to argue from. So if gerontocracy mattered, you're older, then you look at dogs. Dogs are interesting because, and we're not dogs, but we can learn something from all our companion species. If you are an older dog and you're weak, you get no respect. Those that looked at you before and said, oh, you're the man or the woman, then they bite and they treat you. But we humans, because we work in a symbolic world, we say the person is old and feeble, but I will still give him respect. That is, I think, what Harold was talking about when he spoke about the cosmovision, the whole symbolic universe in which we live values certain things and devalues other things. But the question still remains, is the symbolic universe of the cosmovision promoting ethics comes first? Or is it saying, no, it's a political struggle between different factions? That's the question, really. And it depends on where you start. Are you interested in what binds? Or are you interested in the tensions, the agonism in the thing? That's where the start of the, but to presuppose a romantic whole, that's another position. That's not an ethical position. An ethical position is trying to say we must look at what will bind us, but it's not presupposing it's there. So the romantic notion, say these people were always great, part of nature and so forth. There are no such people. They never existed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have history, and we are historical creatures. Anyway, I've spoken too much. Questions, comments?
Yes, one last question.
Yes, thank you very much. I thank you both. Harold, to me, that's fantastic.
Took me a week.
Yes, rap. But I was wondering if don't you think that one of the adaptive measures was the community and
Yes.
hearing
That's more, yeah.
Yeah, hearing
Yeah. That's within the demography.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's within demography. Yeah.
Yeah, because community is what decides what's important or not. And it may be ethical and maybe not, but that's what
Yeah.
in that graph, I think community is something that, those early,
Yes, yes. No, but I mean,
communities.
yes, you're right. And actually, I consider it also, that's what I talked about with mobility and exchange. Mobility to other places where you have relatives. It's just I didn't really, the graph was very packed, but when I write, I'm gonna for sure consider it because that's part of it. And Francio mentioned the part about incest and stuff like that, and we see that also that, for example, people will always have to go to a different village or a different island to get, the genes going. So I mean, I even heard that's also happening with animals, like, yeah, they would get animals from other areas, so that part of community is something that also was you could say, driving force, because people they weren't able to do it by themselves. Nowadays, I can buy the Apple Pro Vision, put it on, and need anything. Don't need anybody. That's walking around. I've seen videos, people walking around or driving, they weren't able to live back in the day because the conditions were not favorable for that. If we didn't
but
share.
Also because animals like ethics, they flow from community.
Yeah.
It's not something that somebody can just do on themselves.
No, of
It's
course not.
what the
Yes.
group wants.
Yes.
And I think
But that's dependent on the conditions where they're in, it's a requirement. So here's the thing, then, and hearing about how Francis said about the part that we are romanticizing the past, the people in the past didn't have any other option. It was either that or you died. My dad, his grandfather, had to supply the food that they ate. If there was rain, you didn't have any food. So there's where the romanticism part is that I understand more and more. The more I work with Francis, is that what he means with it. You have no other option. You have to do it. Because when you are in a situation that you are when you are in a life-threatening situation, I think because I surf, I experience that quite a lot of times, and when you're drowning and you're looking around like, oh, who's gonna save me? There's nobody to save you. You have to rely on what you can do. Hopefully people that can get you out of the water. So I think there's where we have such a good life that we can complain about everything because nothing is gonna happen. Like a tiger's not gonna come and eat us up. Just for a crazy example. The people in the past, they had to be able to know stuff. Otherwise, had a direct impact. And also that maybe is why they didn't live as long age-wise. Because their life was so intensive that it took a toll on their age, not on their, say, their function. I see them as separate.
Is it a short question?
Let's get 3 questions.
Thank you to both of you for your presentations today, very interesting. So there are a couple of vulnerable citizens that are suing the Dutch government for not having a climate plan. Was wondering what are your thoughts on that, and if the other Dutch islands can also take a similar approach in combating climate change.
Good one. Are there other questions? Yeah, I always trust more than one, yeah.
Well, my question is somewhat of a comment and it touches his question. Is one of the underlying factors that you showed throughout the slides, including your slides and your slides, is CO2 emission, population growth, population limits, which in your graph, I found, I was trying to identify where that limit is, because there is a direct link. The more population you have, the longer they live, the faster they grow, the more effect they have on the ecosystem's ability to sustain itself. And in your graph, I didn't see that. And when I look at the rapid numbers that you showed at the beginning, those numbers go fast, yet we're looking for answers, perhaps all in the wrong places.
So
there is a sustainability challenge on how much a square meter can hold.
Exactly. I think the graph is very extensive, but
I know.
when I write, I'll be able to do it. But in the demography part is where it also comes into. For example, in the past, so the pre-contact period, I think there were only a couple of 100 people living at the same time on this island, because that's what the natural system was able to support. In the start of the 20th century, there were 3,000 or 2,000 people or 2,000 people living on the island, and people were dying from thirst and malnutrition. So that small increase made a big difference and big impact. But it's because the people were still dependent on the natural functioning of the natural system. Nowadays, that's why I mentioned we have 100,000, 120,000 people, millions of people coming here, and we're still here because our way of life is not dependent on it. And I think going back to the ethics, it's something that has to be fostered, and it's something that people have to do it from themselves. You know, for example, talk about patient growth. Back in the day, people would get 10 kids, large families, because it was required. You needed to have people that would be able to, you know, help you out. Nowadays, we're getting 1 kids. People are thinking about less and less. But if it's possible that more people can understand why that is necessary thing to do, then we will be able to have a change in that. But it can't be forced. Because people will say like, yeah, but making kids is the easiest thing to do. That's a problem also. It's a very easy thing to do. It's not difficult, you know, so people will have to stop doing that. There will be a need for people to have a different understanding about what it means to live.
But my point is that overpopulation is also one of the risk factors. You talk about tsunamis and earthquakes and all that. Overpopulation is equally as dangerous.
But you can't force people.
I agree.
You know, you can't go and like, let's say, okay, we have 8 billion, let's make it 4. There's people, okay, so this is going to be a bit strange, but there's people that think that that's the way to go.
Yeah, we're not gonna go there. We're not going.
No, we're not going to, I'm just mentioning that there's people that look at it from a statistical point of view, say, okay, we have this much, this is this resources, so if we have that, then we have more chances.
Yeah, yeah.
But we're not doing it.
No, so look, there is a demographic challenge for sure. Globally, I think there's a demographic challenge on this island too. But what is consequential to your question, I'm going to your question, is that I forgot to mention Tiramar, who's our partner on Bonaire for this marketplace and all the transatlantic academic platforms. What is important is that Bonaire also is a liberal democracy in the making. Liberal democracies function best when there is a vibrant civil society that holds the government, holds them and says, hey, you have to do this. I see the Greenpeace Bonaire as part of civil society that's saying to the government in The Hague, but then we have to be specific. The government in The Hague, not the Netherlands, the government in The Hague, it's saying to the government in The Hague, you need to step up and take care of the climate challenges that we face in terms of adaptation and perhaps mitigation. That's really what it's doing. And if it can push its actions through law, but also through the hearts and minds of persons, it might just be able to pull it off. And I think that's part of a healthy democracy, that you have these organizations. Aruba should have lots of civil associations which teach people civics. The YMCA teaches you civics and so forth, pathfinders, and organizations that are more advocacy organizations like Greenpeace and so forth. And you have organizations that are more artistic, and so all of that is part of civil society. That's how I see the Greenpeace case, if understood correctly. The question of autonomy, of course, is the question, are we willing to recognize if climate challenges are real? I think they are. If the technological integration of the world is real, which I think it is, I should say the people on this island have to really have a conversation about what does autonomy mean in this world. It meant something in the 1980s, 70s and so forth, but it might mean something else nowadays. And that conversation needs to be had. You can't presuppose that you're living in the same, you're not, I think.
On that note, I'm going to thank you, Francio Guadeloupe.
Yeah.
I'm going to thank you, Harold Kelly. I'm going to thank everybody who's here tonight. Thank you for making time after either a very relaxing or exhausting weekend, depending on what you did. There are drinks outside for to continue the conversation. If you want to ask any questions to our speakers, please do. If you want to know anything about the Islanders of the Helm project, you can approach me as well. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the University of Aruba and the Center of Lifelong Learning and Christenheim for helping us organize tonight. Thank you so much and good night.